My husband texted, "I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer." I replied, "Understood." Then I canceled his credit cards, cut all financial support. 72 hours later, his lawyer was frantically calling me. And I later found out he was leaving me for my own sister. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. It's a strange thing, the anatomy of a collapse. You imagine it's a single, cataclysmic event, a deafening explosion. But for me, the end of my 15-year marriage wasn't a bang. It was a quiet, insidious buzz. The vibration of a cell phone on a polished oak desk, a sound so ordinary it was sinister. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and my life was about to be split into two distinct parts, before and after. The before was that very morning. It was painfully, beautifully normal. Our kitchen was filled with the early autumn sunlight that I love, the kind that's golden and soft. It illuminated the tiny dust motes dancing in the air, a private, silent ballet. I remember the rich, comforting smell of the French roast coffee I'd brewed, a scent that had been the backdrop to 5,475 of our mornings together. Mark was already at the kitchen island, hunched over his phone, his thumb moving in a frantic, endless scroll. He was wearing the gray t-shirt I'd bought him, the one that had a tiny paint stain on the sleeve from when we tried to repaint the guest room last summer. "Morning," I said, my voice warm. I slid his favorite blue mug, filled to the brim, in front of him. "Hey," he grunted, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Thanks." His distance wasn't new. For the past few months, he'd been encased in a bubble of stress I couldn't seem to penetrate. He'd blame it on a demanding client for his freelance graphic design work, or a creative block, and I, the ever-supportive wife, would nod and give him his space. We talked about the leaky faucet under the sink. I'd reminded him for the third time to call the plumber. He'd nodded vaguely. We discussed the neighbor's new, ridiculously oversized truck. It was the mundane, sturdy wallpaper of a long marriage. When he finally stood up to leave for his home office, our converted spare bedroom, he leaned in and gave my cheek a quick, dry peck. It felt more like a duty than an affection. "Love you," he said, the words an automatic punctuation mark as he was already turning away. I felt a familiar, tiny pang of disappointment, a feeling I had been getting good at ignoring. I told myself this was just a phase, a rough patch. All couples had them. We were solid. We were Carolyn and Mark. I went to my job, my sanctuary of order and logic. As an accounting manager, I find a deep, calming satisfaction in numbers. They are honest. They balance. They don't have hidden meanings or secret resentments. That afternoon, I was deep in my element, wrestling with a beast of a spreadsheet for our quarterly financial review. The office was a low hum of activity around me, keyboards clicking, phones ringing softly, my colleague Brenda complaining about her son's new girlfriend. I tuned it all out. It was just me and the numbers, a world that made perfect, logical sense. And then, the buzz. It wasn't a loud sound, but it sliced through my concentration like a knife. I glanced at my phone. A text from Mark. A small smile touched my lips. Maybe he was texting to apologize for being so distracted that morning. Maybe he wanted to know if I wanted to order takeout for dinner. I swiped the screen open, my smile fading as my eyes scanned the words. The message was short. Terse. Brutal. "Carolyn, I want a divorce. Please direct all future communication through my lawyer, Mr. Davies. His contact details will follow." I read it. Then I read it again. And a third time. The words wouldn't compute. They were like a foreign language my brain refused to translate. Divorce. Lawyer. Mr. Davies. It felt like a line from a bad movie. A strange, high-pitched ringing began to echo in my ears, blocking out the sound of Brenda's chatter. My blood went cold, and the spreadsheet on my computer screen blurred into a meaningless grid of lines and figures. My mind, usually so orderly, became a chaotic whirlwind. A joke? This has to be a sick, twisted joke. His phone was stolen. He was hacked. But I knew. Deep down, in that place of gut-wrenching intuition, I knew it was from him. The tone was his, efficient, detached, and utterly devoid of emotion. It was a business transaction. He was closing an account. Our account. Under the initial wave of shock, a tsunami of hurt was building, a crushing pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. 15 years. We'd built a life together, brick by brick. We'd survived a miscarriage, his father's long illness, my mother's endless criticisms. We had history. We had roots. And he had just ripped it all up with a text message while I was color-coding cells on a spreadsheet. He didn't even have the courage, the basic human decency, to face me. Just then, Brenda appeared at my cubicle wall. "Hey, Carolyn? Do you have a second to look at these P&L numbers? They're not adding up for me." I looked up at her, and it felt like I was looking at her from the bottom of a well. I had to force my face into the shape of a smile. My own voice sounded alien to me when I spoke. "Sure, Brenda. Just give me 5 minutes." She nodded and walked away, oblivious. The world was still spinning on its axis for everyone else. Only my world had stopped. In those 5 minutes, something inside me shifted. The hurt and shock were still there, a raging inferno in my core, but a layer of ice formed over the top of it. It was a strange, Arctic calm. A survival mechanism. He had drawn the battle lines. He had dictated the rules of engagement. Lawyers only. Fine. If he wanted to reduce our marriage to a legal proceeding, then I would be the most logical, meticulous, and unemotional participant he had ever seen. My fingers, cold and stiff, moved over my phone's keyboard. I typed a single word, the only response that felt appropriate. Understood. I hit send. The small delivered notification appeared beneath it. And with that, the 15-year marriage of Carolyn and Mark was over. A new, terrifying chapter had begun, and I, its unwilling protagonist, had just taken my first step into the war. The drive home was an out-of-body experience. I was vaguely aware of the traffic, of the setting sun casting long shadows across the highway, but it all felt unreal, like I was watching a movie. The radio was playing some cheerful pop song, a tune we had once sung along to on a road trip. The sound was so jarring, so offensive in its happiness, that I reached over and slammed the power button, plunging the car into a thick, suffocating silence. When I turned onto our street, everything looked painfully normal. Mrs. Henderson was watering her prize-winning petunias. The Miller kids were riding their bikes in circles on their driveway. It was a portrait of suburban tranquility, and I felt like a ghost driving through it. I pulled into our driveway, the crunch of the tires on the gravel the only sound. The house was dark. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The silence that met me was different from the silence in the car. This was a heavy, layered silence, thick with absence. I could feel his non-presence in every room. He'd packed quickly, but not neatly. The closet in our bedroom was the first place I looked. A chunk of his clothes was gone, leaving a sad, gappy space on the rod. A few empty hangers were tossed on the floor. He'd taken his expensive suits, his favorite jeans, but he'd left the old, faded university sweatshirt I'd bought him for our 3rd anniversary. Did he forget it, or did it just not mean anything to him anymore? I walked into his home office. His laptop was gone, along with his portfolio case. But he'd left the bookshelf full. I ran my fingers over the spines of books I had given him over the years. A first edition from his favorite author. A collection of poetry I'd thought was romantic. All left behind, like artifacts from a forgotten civilization. I ended up back in my own small office, the place where I managed our lives on paper. I sank into my chair, the exhaustion hitting me like a physical blow. My eyes fell on the wedding photograph I had turned face down earlier that day. A wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me. It was so intense it made me dizzy. How dare he? How dare he do this to us, to me, with such cowardly, dismissive cruelty? That rage was a fuel. It burned away the paralysis. The icy calm returned, colder and sharper this time. If he wanted to erase our life together, I would help him. I would become the architect of this demolition. I opened my laptop, the screen a stark white light in the growing darkness. My fingers found their rhythm on the keyboard. This was my domain. This was where I had control. First, the American Express card. It was my account, with my excellent credit score. He was just an authorized user, a status that gave him all the benefits and none of the responsibility. I logged in, navigating the familiar menus. I thought of the time he'd used it to take us to that ridiculously expensive French restaurant for our 10th anniversary. He'd made a grand show of handing the platinum card to the waiter, as if it were his. The memory, once warm, now felt like a humiliation. I found his name. Click. Remove user. A small, digital guillotine. Next, the monthly transfer. The allowance, as I now bitterly called it. I remembered the conversation when I first proposed it. He'd been so stressed about a client who was late to pay, worried about covering his own expenses. Don't be silly, I had said, full of wifely generosity. We're a team. My salary is our salary. He had looked so grateful, telling me I was his rock. What a fool I had been. I logged into my bank, found the recurring payment schedule, and clicked delete. The screen flashed a confirmation: this transaction has been permanently cancelled. Permanently. The word echoed in the silent room. Then, the tangled web of our digital life. Netflix. We had spent hundreds of hours on the sofa, binge-watching shows, his arm around me. It was one of the simple intimacies I treasured. I logged in, went to the account settings, a page I hadn't visited in years. Sign out of all devices. Click. Then I changed the password to a random scramble of letters and numbers, a tribute to our dead dog. Something personal, yet utterly unknowable to him. I did the same for HBO Max, for Amazon Prime, for our shared music streaming account. Each click was a small, satisfying severance. I moved on to the car. The sleek sedan he drove was leased in my name. The insurance policy was mine. I resisted the immediate, furious urge to report it stolen. That was messy, illegal. Instead, I opened a new document and typed, Agenda for Lawyer, 1, CR lease. Underneath, I added, Cancel gas card. It was tied to the Amex. Let him figure out how to fill the tank. It was almost midnight when I was done. I had systematically, efficiently, and legally dismantled the financial scaffolding of our shared life. I wasn't motivated by revenge, or at least, that's what I told myself. I was motivated by a primal need for self-preservation. He had pushed me out of the boat in the middle of the ocean. I was simply making sure he didn't get to keep the life raft. As I was about to close my laptop, a new email pinged in my inbox. The subject line, Contact Information, Davies Law Firm. I opened it. It contained a formal V-card with the name, address, and phone number of Mark's chosen assassin. Mr. Davies. The name felt slimy in my mind. I didn't hesitate. I thought of my colleague Sarah's words, a shark in a designer suit. I found the contact information for her lawyer, Ms. Albright, and forwarded the email immediately. My own message was a carbon copy of the one I had sent from work, updated for clarity. Forwarding contact from my husband's counsel. As stated, he has demanded a divorce via text and instated a lawyer-only communication rule. I have complied and taken preliminary steps to secure my personal financial accounts. I need to retain you immediately. Please advise on the next steps. I hit send. The fortress was complete. The drawbridge was up. The perimeter was secured. I stood up from my desk and looked out the window into the blackness of the night. I was alone, in a house that no longer felt like home, facing a war I never wanted. But for the first time since that buzz had shattered my afternoon, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a soldier. The 72 hours that followed were a masterclass in psychological torture. The fortress I'd built to protect myself began to feel like a solitary confinement cell. The silence was my constant companion, a heavy blanket that smothered every thought. I'd wander through the rooms of the house, a ghost in my own life, tracing the outlines of furniture with my fingertips, half expecting to feel the static of his presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, was magnified, amplified, until the quiet was a roar in my ears. Sleep offered no escape. I would lie awake in the vast, empty expanse of our king-sized bed, the indentation on his side of the mattress a cruel reminder of what was gone. I'd stare at the shifting shadows on the ceiling, my mind a relentless movie projector, replaying scenes from our marriage. I dissected every word, every gesture from the last few months, searching for the moment the cracks began to show. Was it when he started locking his phone? Or the way his eyes would glaze over when I talked about my day at work? The not knowing was a physical ache, a constant, dull throb behind my eyes. I tried to act normal. I went to work. I sat in meetings, nodding and taking notes, while a silent scream echoed in my head. I made small talk by the coffee machine, discussing weather and weekend plans, the words tasting like lies on my tongue. I felt fractured, like I was two different people, the competent, smiling Carolyn on the outside, and the shattered, bewildered woman on the inside. The urge to break the silence, to reach out to him, was a ferocious, desperate thing. Several times, I found myself with my phone in my hand, his number on the screen. My thumb would hover over the call button, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream at him. Why? What did I do wrong? After 15 years, don't I deserve more than a text message? But then, the image of his cold, clinical words would flash in my mind. All communication through my lawyer. He had set the rules. If I broke them, I would be the hysterical, emotional woman he probably already thought I was. I would lose the only thing I had left, my dignity. And then there was Jessica. My little sister. The urge to call her was even stronger. She was my person, my first friend. I could picture it so clearly, her rushing over, a bottle of cheap red wine in her hand, her arms wrapping around me in a fierce hug. She'd listen to me cry, she'd call Mark every name in the book, she'd make me feel less alone. I even typed out a text to her one sleepless night, my fingers shaking. Jess, something terrible has happened. Can you talk? But then that cold knot of dread would tighten in my stomach. The Vegas trip. Her odd defensiveness of him. I couldn't explain it, but some primal instinct screamed at me to wait. I deleted the text. So I existed in the limbo, in the deafening quiet, holding my breath. I felt like a character in a suspense movie, waiting for the jump scare I knew was coming. It came on Friday afternoon. I was driving home, caught in the slow, crawling misery of rush hour traffic. My phone rang, the shrill sound making me jump. It was an unknown number with a local area code. This was it. The other shoe was dropping. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I couldn't talk like this, surrounded by a sea of cars. I signaled and pulled into the parking lot of a strip mall. I parked in front of a laundromat, staring at the spinning clothes in the window, a bizarrely domestic backdrop for the impending confrontation. I took 3 deep, ragged breaths, trying to find that icy calm that had served me so well. You are a soldier, I told myself. This is the first contact. I answered the phone. Hello? My voice was surprisingly clear, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Is this Carolyn? The voice was male, clipped and marinated in arrogance. "This is she," I corrected, a small act of defiance. "This is Mr. Davies," he announced, as if I should be impressed. "I represent Mark." "I'm aware," I said, my voice flat. "I received your contact information." He cleared his throat, a pompous, self-important sound. "Good. Then let's get straight to it. My client," he began, and the condescension in his tone was palpable, "is experiencing some rather significant difficulties." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch, forcing him to continue. "Frankly, Carolyn, his financial situation is in chaos," he said, his voice rising with indignation. "His credit cards have been declined at a grocery store. His bank account is empty. Funds have been abruptly and maliciously cut off. As you should know, the financial status quo is typically maintained during the initial phase of a separation to ensure stability." I stared at a bright red sock tumbling over and over in a dryer. Stability. He had the audacity to talk about stability. I took another slow breath. "Mr. Davies," I began, my voice as level and cool as a frozen lake. "Let me be crystal clear so that there are no misunderstandings. On Tuesday afternoon, my husband of 15 years sent me a text message. That message stated, and I will quote it for you, 'I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer.' I received this directive. I understood this directive. And I have complied with this directive in its entirety." I could hear him breathing on the other end, a sharp, surprised sound. "The informal financial arrangements of our marriage," I continued, "the very definition of the status quo you're referring to, were predicated on a foundation of trust and mutual communication. Your client personally and unilaterally obliterated that foundation. Therefore, those arrangements ceased to exist at 1:42 p.m. on Tuesday." There was a distinct pause. I could hear the faint rustle of papers, the sound of a man scrambling. He had expected a weeping, compliant wife. He had not prepared for a logical, well-articulated defense. "He needs funds now," Mr. Davies repeated, his voice losing some of its bluster. "For necessities. For accommodation." The word hung in the air. "Accommodation?" I asked, allowing a sliver of genuine surprise into my voice. "I'm surprised to hear that. Where is he staying?" "He has a perfectly good home with me." "That is not pertinent to this discussion," he snapped, his composure cracking. "You have acted in bad faith, Carolyn. You have left him with nothing." That was it. The accusation was so galling, so profoundly unjust, that my own anger finally broke through the ice. "Bad faith?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "Let's talk about bad faith, Mr. Davies. Bad faith is detonating a marriage over iMessage. Bad faith is packing a bag while your wife is at work, earning the money that pays the mortgage on the house you just abandoned. Bad faith is hiring a lawyer before you even have a conversation with the woman you've shared your life with for a decade and a half. My husband wanted a legal, formal separation. That is precisely what he is getting. Any future financial support will be determined legally and formally, not through bullying phone calls." Another, much longer silence. I had him. He knew I had him. "My client," he finally said, his voice stiff and formal, "will be filing a motion for emergency financial relief." "That is his right," I replied, my voice back to its cool, level tone. "You may direct that filing, and all future communication, to my attorney, Ms. Albright. I trust you still have her details." "Yes," he bit out. "Wonderful. Then as this conversation is not being conducted through my legal counsel, it is in direct violation of my husband's own rule. Good day, Mr. Davies." I pressed the red end call button before he could utter another syllable. My hand was trembling as I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat. But I wasn't scared. A fierce, wild surge of adrenaline was pumping through me. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated power. He had thrown the first punch, and I had not only blocked it, but I had landed a solid one in return. I started the car, the engine roaring to life. I was no longer a ghost. In my own life, I was a fighter. And the war had just begun. The aftermath of that phone call felt like the opening bell of a boxing match. The following week, the first official legal documents landed in Ms. Albright's inbox. It was the motion for emergency spousal support Mr. Davies had threatened. The amount they were asking for was so ludicrous it would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. They wanted me to pay for a luxury apartment, a new car lease, his groceries, his discretionary spending, and his legal fees. It was a fantasy list, a demand to not only fund his life without me but to upgrade it. Ms. Albright was unfazed. "It's a classic bully tactic," she said over the phone, her voice calm and sharp. "They shoot for the moon, hoping the judge will give them the stars. We'll counter with reality." Her response was a masterpiece of legal precision. She outlined my continued payment of all marital debts, including the mortgage on the home he had chosen to leave. She attached my salary information and a proposed budget for him based on actual, reasonable living expenses, not a lifestyle of a bachelor being bankrolled by his ex-wife. While the lawyers exchanged their carefully worded blows, the personal attacks began to escalate. And the most painful one came from the one person I thought I could count on, the one person I was desperately missing, my sister, Jessica. Before I tell you about the phone call that ripped my world apart for the second time, you need to understand about us. I'm 6 years older. I practically raised her after our dad died. I was the one who helped her with homework, who taught her how to do her makeup, who held her while she cried over her first broken heart. When she wanted to go to art school and my mom said it was too expensive, I took a second job waiting tables on weekends to help pay her tuition. I wasn't just her big sister, I was her fiercest protector, her biggest cheerleader. Or so I thought. Her name flashed on my phone on a Wednesday night. My heart did a painful lurch. For a moment, a wave of desperate hope washed over me. She's calling to check on me. She finally heard what happened and she's calling to offer support. That hope was a fragile, stupid thing, and it was about to be crushed into dust. I answered, my voice small. "Hello? Carolyn? What the hell are you doing?" There was no warmth, no concern. Just a screeching, venomous rage that vibrated through the phone. I was so stunned, I could barely form words. "Jess? What's wrong?" "Don't you what's wrong me," she screamed. I could hear the echo in her voice, she must have had me on speaker. "Mark is here. At my apartment. He's sleeping on my damn couch because of you. You cut him off completely. He was humiliated at the grocery store. He couldn't even buy a gallon of milk. How could you be so cold, so vindictive?" The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. Mark was at her apartment. Of all the places in the world. The cold knot of dread that had been sitting in my stomach for a week tightened into a ball of solid ice. "Jessica," I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "He is the one who asked for a divorce. He left me. He sent me a text message and told me to only speak to his lawyer. I was just..." "Oh, spare me your perfect, logical excuses, Carolyn," she spat, her voice dripping with a resentment I had never heard before. "This isn't one of your damn spreadsheets. This is a human being. This is Mark. He's a sensitive soul, an artist. You know he's not good with the practical side of things. You were always the one who handled everything. You should be helping him through this, not punishing him." Her words were a distortion of reality so profound it made my head spin. I should be helping him? But it was her next sentence, a slip of the tongue born from pure rage, that exposed the rotten, putrid truth of it all. "You're just making this so much harder for us," she shrieked. "Us." The word dropped into the conversation like a stone in a silent pond, the ripples spreading outwards, tainting everything. My voice went deadly quiet. All the trembling was gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. Us? I repeated. What do you mean, us, Jessica? A frantic, telling silence on the other end. I could practically hear her mind racing, trying to backtrack. I meant. She stammered, her voice suddenly losing its confidence. I meant, it's hard for me. Having to take care of him. Because you just abandoned him. It's a lot of pressure on me. It was a clumsy, pathetic lie. The truth was there, hanging in the air between us, ugly and undeniable. It wasn't just an affair. It was a conspiracy. My husband and my sister. I said, my voice as cold and empty as a winter sky, I was going to call you, Jess. The night it happened. I needed my sister. I'm glad I didn't. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't want to hear more lies, more pathetic justifications. I ended the call. For a long moment, I just stood in the middle of my kitchen, the phone still clutched in my hand. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. A terrifying calm washed over me. The shock was so profound, the betrayal so absolute, that it was beyond tears. It was an amputation. A part of my life, a part of my heart that I thought was essential, had been violently severed. I walked over to the refrigerator, my movements stiff and robotic. There was a framed photo there, held by a cheesy Sisters Forever magnet. It was from her wedding a few years ago. I was her maid of honor, beaming at her side. She looked so happy, so beautiful. I took the photo down, pulled it from its frame, and with slow, deliberate movements, I ripped it in half. Then I ripped it into quarters. And I kept ripping until all that was left was a small pile of colorful confetti in my hands. I let the pieces flutter from my fingers into the trash can. It was a quiet, pathetic little ceremony for a death. The death of the sister I thought I had. That night, for the first time in a week, I didn't cry. I just felt empty. The week leading up to the emergency support hearing was a blur of meetings with Ms. Albright and sleepless nights staring at my ceiling. The anger had subsided, replaced by a grim, weary determination. The courthouse felt like a foreign country, with its own language and rituals. It smelled of old paper, floor polish, and low-grade anxiety. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a dark navy suit and low heels. I wanted to look professional, solid, unbreakable. Armor. Seeing Mark across the sterile courtroom was a jolt. He was standing with Mr. Davies, fidgeting with his tie. He looked pale and drawn, and when his eyes accidentally met mine, he flinched as if he'd been burned and quickly looked away. The man I had shared a bed with for 15 years couldn't even hold my gaze for 2 seconds. There was no defiance in him, just a shifty, cornered animal fear. It wasn't satisfying. It was just pathetic. I sat beside Ms. Albright, my back ramrod straight, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. She gave me a small, confident nod. "We're ready," she whispered. "Just breathe." Mr. Davies began, and his performance was just as theatrical as I had imagined. He painted Mark as a sensitive artist, a man whose gentle soul was being crushed by the cogs of the corporate world his unfeeling and controlling wife represented. He used words like financially crippled, emotionally devastated, and maliciously abandoned. At one point, he actually gestured toward me and said I had pulled the rug out from under him in an act of calculated cruelty. I felt a hot flush of rage crawl up my neck, but I just stared straight ahead at the judge, my face a mask of neutrality. Then, Ms. Albright stood up. The contrast was stark. There was no drama, no flowery language. She was a surgeon, laying out her instruments with calm precision. "Your Honor," she began, her voice crisp and clear. "We are not here to discuss feelings. We are here to discuss facts." She started with the text message, displaying a large printout of it on the courtroom monitor. The fact is, Your Honor, that Mr. Mark's last name unilaterally terminated the communication and trust within this marriage. He, and he alone, dictated that all future matters be handled through legal counsel. Next, the bank statements. She presented a clear, color-coded summary. The fact is, my client did not cut him off. She secured her personal accounts, on which he was only an authorized user. Furthermore, she has continued to pay 100% of the marital debts from her own salary, the mortgage, the utilities, the car insurance, the property taxes. Mr. Mark's last name is living rent-free, so to speak, on paper. Then she moved in for the kill. And finally, Your Honor, the most telling fact of all. She presented the bank records from the old, dormant joint account. This is a record of an attempted withdrawal of the full balance by Mr. Mark's last name after he had sent his text message. This is not the action of a destitute man seeking stability. This is the action of a man attempting a final money grab before the legal process could begin. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Judge Miller, peered over her glasses, her eyes fixed on Mark. Her expression was a mixture of impatience and disdain. She addressed him directly. Mr. Mark's last name, please stand. Mark shuffled to his feet, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Sir, the judge said, her voice sharp as glass. I have one question for you. Why did you feel it was appropriate to end a 15-year marriage with a text message? Mark swallowed hard. The entire courtroom was silent. Well, Your Honor, he stammered, shifting his weight from foot to foot. It was a complicated situation. I didn't know how else. You didn't know how else to have a conversation with your wife? The judge cut him off, her voice laced with disbelief. Thank you, you may sit down. The ruling was a decisive victory. Judge Miller awarded Mark a minimal amount of temporary support, barely enough to cover rent on a cheap apartment and groceries. It was nowhere near the king's ransom he had demanded. In her summary, she stated plainly that Mark's precipitous and unconventional actions were the primary cause of his current financial instability. I walked out of that courthouse feeling 10 pounds lighter. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was vindication. It was the first time an impartial, powerful voice had confirmed what I knew to be true. I was not the villain of this story. I wish I could say that courtroom victory was the end of the ugliness, but it was only the beginning of a new, dirtier chapter. Having failed to get what they wanted through legal means, they resorted to guerrilla warfare. The first attack was aimed at my livelihood. I was in a team meeting when my phone vibrated with a summons from Human Resources. My boss, David, was already in the HR manager's office when I arrived, his expression grim. Carolyn, the manager, a woman named Patricia, began, her voice carefully neutral. We've received an anonymous complaint against you. My stomach turned to ice. A complaint? About what? It alleges, she said, reading from a paper in front of her, a pattern of erratic and unstable behavior, and the misuse of company time and resources for personal legal matters. I felt the room spin. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but the words unstable behavior were designed to poison the well, to make my colleagues and superiors question my competence. It was a direct shot from Mark and Jessica, I had no doubt. Before I could even defend myself, David spoke up. He leaned forward, his voice firm. Patricia, I've been Carolyn's direct supervisor for 7 years. She is the most stable, reliable, and ethical employee I have. Her work has been exemplary, even under what I know is immense personal pressure lately. This complaint is not only baseless, it's transparently malicious. I'll stake my own reputation on her integrity. I almost burst into tears right there. In a world where I felt completely alone, this unexpected act of loyalty was a lifeline. Patricia, seeing David's unwavering support, agreed to dismiss the complaint after a cursory check of my computer logs found nothing. But the incident left me shaken. They weren't just trying to take my money, they were trying to destroy my reputation and my career. The next assault came a few days later, and it was far more personal. The caller ID said Mom. I hesitated, the memory of our last conversation around. But a foolish, hopeful part of me thought maybe she'd had a change of heart. Maybe she was calling to apologize. She wasn't. Carolyn, dear, she began, her voice a sickly sweet coo that set my teeth on edge. I was just on the phone with your sister. That poor thing is just beside herself with worry. Is she? I said, my voice flat. Yes. This legal battle, it's taking a toll on her and Mark. He's not sleeping, he's losing weight. They just want this to be over so they can start their life together. Then they should stop suing me for money we both know he isn't entitled to, I said. My mother sighed, a long, theatrical, put-upon sound. Oh, Carolyn, why must you always be so difficult? This isn't about the money. This is about family. Your sister is in love. I haven't seen her this happy since, well, ever. Her happiness is built on my heartbreak, Mom, I said, my voice rising despite myself. How can you not see that? And then she delivered the line that severed the final, frayed thread of our relationship. You know, your father, God rest his soul, he always said you were the strong one. The resilient one. He knew you could handle anything. Jessica, she's more fragile. She needs this. She needs Mark. You're strong enough to take this loss. She isn't. She was using my own father's memory as a weapon against me. She was framing my pain as a strength, and my sister's selfishness as a fragile need. She was asking me to sacrifice myself on the altar of my sister's happiness. A cold, terrifying rage filled me. It was so pure, so absolute, it burned away every last scrap of daughterly obligation I had ever felt. I'm going to say this once, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. So listen carefully. You have chosen a side. And it wasn't mine. Do not call me again to plead their case. Do not call me to talk about Jessica's happiness. As far as I'm concerned, I no longer have a sister. And I am seriously rethinking whether I have a mother. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and then, with a strange sense of finality, I blocked her number. I blocked Jessica's too. I stood there in the quiet of my living room, the full weight of what I had just done settling over me. I had cut myself off from my entire family. I was an island. It was a terrifying thought. But it was also, in a strange way, liberating. The betrayals had been so complete, so absolute, that there was nothing left to lose. And when you have nothing left to lose, you have everything to fight for. That night, I didn't just feel like a soldier anymore. I felt like a general. And I was about to go on the offensive. The very next morning, I was in Ms. Albright's office, a new fire in my belly. I recounted the HR complaint, the horrific call with my mother. They're not going to stop, I said, my voice hard. They think they can bully me, exhaust me, and isolate me until I break. It's not going to work. I want to fight back, and I want to hit them where it hurts. I want a full, forensic financial discovery. I want to know where every single penny has gone for the last 3 years. Ms. Albright leaned back in her leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. Carolyn, she said. I've been waiting for you to say that. Let's go hunting. The discovery process was a grueling, tedious slug. It involved mountains of paperwork, subpoenas, and long hours spent combing through bank statements, credit card bills, and tax returns. It was like piecing together a giant, ugly puzzle. But with every new piece we found, the picture of Mark and Jessica's deception became clearer and more damning. We started with their known bank accounts. We saw small, odd transfers from Mark to Jessica, labeled reimbursement or loan. Then we subpoenaed the records for the secret joint credit card we already knew about. The statements were a roadmap of their affair. Dinners at expensive restaurants I'd never been to. Weekend getaways to charming little inns. And then we saw it, a charge for 2 round-trip tickets to St. Bart's, for a week-long trip, dated 3 months before he'd sent me the text. I remembered that week vividly. He had told me he was at a graphic design conference in Chicago, complaining about the terrible hotel and the boring seminars. He had been sunning himself on a beach with my sister while I was at home, watering his plants. The rage was a constant, low burn now, fueling my determination. But the true smoking gun, the piece of evidence that would blow their entire case out of the water, was still hidden. We suspected they had assets they weren't disclosing, but we couldn't prove it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. Ms. Albright's investigator, a meticulous former CPA, noticed a series of small, regular withdrawals from Mark's business account, all to a bank we didn't recognize. We subpoenaed the records for that bank, and what we got back was the key to the entire conspiracy. Mark and Jessica had opened a secret joint savings account a full year before the divorce. And they had been funneling money into it. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. And then we saw the deposit that made my blood run cold. A $50,000 wire transfer. It was from my inheritance. After my father passed, I had given Mark access to the investment account, trusting him to help me manage it. He had told me he was moving that money into a higher yield bond fund. Instead, he had wired it directly into the secret account he shared with my sister. But it got worse. The court granted us access to their email correspondence related to their financial planning. And there, in cold, hard, black and white, was their plan. We sat in Ms. Albright's conference room, the printouts spread across the table like a funeral shroud. I read emails where they discussed their escape fund. They talked about me with a chilling, casual cruelty. In one, Jessica wrote, "Don't worry, honey. Just a little longer. Carolyn is so focused on her job, she never looks at the statements anyway. She trusts you completely." In another, Mark outlined his strategy. "The best time to do it is right after the new year," he wrote. "She'll have just gotten her annual bonus. We can use that to pay off the last of the card debt before we go. I'll handle the text. It's cleaner that way. No messy emotions. Cleaner. No messy emotions." And then, I found the email that made me physically ill. It was from a high-end jewelry store, confirming the online purchase of a custom-designed, 3-carat diamond engagement ring. The shipping address was Jessica's apartment. Attached was a digital receipt. He had used the money he'd stolen from my inheritance to buy my sister an engagement ring. I put the paper down on the polished table. My hands were perfectly steady. The hurt, the rage, the sorrow, it had all burned away. All that was left was a terrifying, crystalline certainty. This was no longer a divorce. It was a criminal investigation. I looked up at Ms. Albright. Her face was a mask of cold fury. She didn't need to say anything. We both knew. The hunt was over. We had them. And we were about to hang their hides on the wall. The final act did not play out in a courtroom. There would be no dramatic trial, no public testimony. Ms. Albright decided on a more direct, more brutal approach. She called Mr. Davies and requested an immediate, in-person, 4-way settlement conference. "Tell him to bring his client," she'd said, her voice like chipped ice. "And tell him to bring his checkbook." We met in a soulless, beige conference room at a neutral law firm. I dressed for the occasion in a severe black suit. I felt like I was attending a funeral. Theirs. Mark and Mr. Davies were already there when we arrived. Mark looked like a wraith. He was gaunt, his eyes hollowed out, and he couldn't stop fidgeting with a pen, clicking it over and over. He wouldn't look at me. We all sat down at the long, polished table. Mr. Davies started to launch into some pompous speech about finding a mutually agreeable path forward. Ms. Albright held up a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. We can dispense with the pleasantries, Robert, she said, using his first name in a way that was both familiar and utterly dismissive. She reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, spiral-bound document, nearly 3 inches thick. She slid it across the table. It landed in front of Mark with a heavy, final thud. The cover read, Project Nightingale, a summary of findings. Nightingale was Jessica's middle name. What the hell is this? Mr. Davies demanded. That, Ms. Albright said, her voice dangerously soft, is a meticulously documented account of your client's conspiracy to commit marital fraud, complete with bank statements, wire transfers, email correspondence, and receipts. My personal favorite is tab G, the one with the engagement ring. 3 carat. Very nice. Mark made a small, strangled noise in the back of his throat. Mr. Davies snatched the binder and began to flip through it. I watched his face cycle through a series of emotions, confusion, then annoyance, then dawning comprehension, and finally, sheer, unadulterated panic. He paled. He actually went white. Mark finally looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a desperate, pleading terror. He opened his mouth, as if to speak, but no words came out. I just stared back at him, my expression a complete blank. The man sitting across from me was a stranger. I felt no pity. No anger. Nothing. Seeing it all laid out in black and white, the plans they made, the future they were building behind my back, with my money, it broke something inside me. But it also forged something new, something unbreakable. It was in that moment, at my absolute lowest, that I knew I had to see this through to the end, not for revenge, but for myself. If you're still listening to this, please do me a favor and like this video, and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you amazing people are still here, and that I'm not just talking into the void. Your support means more than you can possibly know, and it gives me the strength to keep going. Just comment with the number 1 so I know you're with me on this journey. And now, let me tell you how it all ended. Ms. Albright let the damning silence hang in the air for a full minute. She let them stew in the poison of their own creation. Finally, she leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. So, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor. Here is what is going to happen. This is not an offer. It is not a negotiation. It is the settlement agreement that your client will sign today. The alternative is that this binder gets filed as Exhibit A in our civil fraud lawsuit, which we will be filing on Monday morning. And of course, we'll be forwarding a copy to the district attorney's office. Wire fraud is a rather serious offense. She laid out the terms. They were swift and merciless. The house would be sold. The first $50,000 from the sale, my stolen inheritance, would be returned to me immediately, off the top. The remaining equity would be split 70/30ths in my favor. All requests for spousal support were to be withdrawn, permanently. He would not get another dime from me for the rest of his life. He would assume 100% of all marital debt, including the business loan I had foolishly co-signed. He would have 30 days to refinance and get my name off it. And finally, he would pay, from his share of the house proceeds, for every single dollar I had spent on my legal fees. Mr. Davies looked like he was going to be sick. This is punitive. It's extortion, he stammered. Ms. Albright just smiled that thin, terrifying smile. No, Robert, she said. This is consequences. She looked at her watch. You have 30 minutes to sign. She and I stood up and walked out of the conference room, leaving them to their panic. We didn't have to wait 30 minutes. In less than 10, Mr. Davies emerged, his face gray. The papers were signed. It was done. It's been over a year. A lifetime. The first few months after the divorce were a haze of boxes and paperwork. Selling the house was like amputating a limb. Every room held a ghost. I packed up my life, sorting 15 years of memories into 3 piles: keep, donate, and burn. The burn pile was surprisingly large. I bought a small, sunny apartment in a neighborhood I'd always loved, one Mark had always called too noisy. The first night, I sat on the floor in the empty living room, surrounded by boxes, and ate pizza straight from the carton. The quiet wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. It was mine. I slowly started to rebuild. I reconnected with the friends Mark had subtly pushed away over the years. I started hiking on weekends, feeling the burn in my lungs and the sun on my face. And 6 months ago, I did something just for me. I booked a 2-week solo trip to Italy. I ate pasta, I drank wine, I sat in ancient piazzas and sketched in a notebook, a hobby I hadn't touched in years. I learned to enjoy my own company, to be my own best friend. And them? I don't seek out information, but it finds me. They never made it to the Caribbean. After paying the debts and the legal fees, Mark's share of the house proceeds was almost entirely wiped out. They live in a cramped, run-down rental on the other side of town. The great, passionate love affair, built on the thrill of deception, apparently couldn't survive the harsh reality of budgeting and paying bills. I saw them once. I was at the grocery store, in the laundry detergent aisle. I heard their voices before I saw them. They were bickering, their voices sharp and tired, about whether to buy the brand name soap or the cheap generic. Jessica looked haggard, the joyful glow my mother had talked about completely gone, replaced by a permanent frown. Mark just looked defeated, a stooped, gray man who had traded everything for nothing. They didn't see me. I quietly backed my cart away and went down a different aisle. And as I stood there, looking at a wall of breakfast cereals, I realized something profound. I felt nothing. No anger, no pain, no satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet indifference. They were no longer the villains in my story. They were just two unhappy people in a grocery store. They had no more power over me. My mother and I don't speak. She tried to call a few times after the settlement, but I never picked up. The wound is too deep. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. My life isn't the one I planned. It's better. It's quieter, smaller, but it's more authentic. It's mine. That text message was meant to be the end of my life, but it turned out to be the beginning. He thought he was closing a chapter, but all he did was force me to write a whole new, much better book. And I'm the only author. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. It's not an easy one to tell, but it's an important one. If you've ever been made to feel small, or been betrayed by those you trusted most, know that you are not alone, and you are so much stronger than you think. Please, share your own stories of strength in the comments below. Let's lift each other up. And don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can continue to share and heal together. Thank you.